If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food? The question rose from a thin, dust-covered girl standing barefoot beneath the blinding backstage lights of the New York Broadcasting Arena. 10-year-old Ari Monroe held a broken guitar against her chest, the way some children hold their last piece of safety. The instrument had followed her through 3 years of cold nights and hungry mornings, and now it trembled faintly in her arms as she faced the man who controlled her fate. Logan Pierce, the show's polished producer, stared at her for a beat before a low, cruel laugh echoed off the concrete walls. To him, Ari wasn't a contestant. She was bait, a piece of cheap entertainment to make America chuckle before the real stars walked on stage. But Ari didn't flinch. She simply lifted her chin, her eyes steady in a way that did not belong to a child. Something in that calm unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. Around them, stagehands rushed, cables hissed, cameras snapped into place. The world was moving too fast for a girl like her, too loud, too bright, too merciless. And yet Ari stood in the middle of it all with a stillness that felt almost fatalistic, as if she already knew this night would change more than just her own life. When the wind from an opening door swept across the hallway, it lifted the corner of a faded envelope tucked inside her backpack, an envelope left behind by the only person who had ever believed she could be more than what the world insisted she was. Ari pressed the bag closer to her side, guarding the secret that could flip this entire stage upside down if anyone ever learned the truth. Logan's smirk widened. "Go on then, kid. Let's see what your little street show can do." Ari didn't answer. She just breathed in, slow and controlled, as the arena lights burned over her small frame. Behind that silence was a storm waiting to break. And if this opening moment tightens something in your chest, if you feel the spark of what's coming, take a second to like, subscribe, and comment. What unfolds next will prove that some voices refuse to stay buried, no matter how hard the world tries to silence them. They found her on a street corner, the kind of place most people pass without ever looking twice. Ari was singing for coins beside a shuttered bodega, her broken guitar resting against her hip like it had grown there. The production assistants from American Stars slowed as they approached her, exchanging glances charged with the kind of excitement that had nothing to do with admiration. They had been sent out to find interesting characters for a special episode, and the moment they saw Ari, barefoot, hungry, radiant in a way she didn't yet understand, they believed they'd struck gold. "Perfect," one of them whispered, as if discovering a prop rather than a child. "She'll make great contrast." Ari heard every word. She didn't protest, didn't defend. Herself didn't fold into shame the way they expected. Instead, she simply nodded when they asked if she wanted to join the show. Her expression was unreadable, neither grateful nor fearful, a quiet puzzle wrapped in dust and dignity. Even then, before the cameras, before the sabotage, before the stage lights carved her into a silhouette the whole country would remember, she carried a steadiness that made adults uncomfortable. They mistook poverty for helplessness. Ari knew better. As they escorted her through service hallways and freight entrances, she followed with small, measured steps, absorbing every detail. The cold, metallic smell of backstage corridors, the echo of hurried footsteps on concrete floors, the bright, artificial lights that washed every face into something sharp and hard. She walked through it all without blinking, as if she'd already rehearsed this moment somewhere deep inside her mind. And maybe she had. Because for 3 years, ever since her grandmother Magnolia Monroe took her last breath in a cramped hospital room that ran out of mercy too soon, Ari had lived between cracked sidewalks and sheltered doorways. Magnolia had been all she had left in this world. Magnolia, the jazz gospel legend who sang like thunder rolling through a cathedral. Magnolia, the woman who had taught her to breathe music, not just sing it. Magnolia, who believed a voice was a blade when the world tried to crush you. Magnolia, who trained Ari with a rigor that would break most grown singers. Magnolia, who died without the world knowing the granddaughter she left behind might carry a spark even brighter. That loss hardened Ari, but it also sharpened her. So, when Logan Pierce appeared in the hallway, clipboard in hand, eyes filled with the arrogance of a man convinced he understands everything he sees, Ari did not shrink. He looked her over like a casting choice, not a human being. "We'll put you last," he said, hardly bothering to meet her eyes. "After the real talent, you'll balance the show." The assistants laughed under their breath. Logan didn't. Ari tightened her grip on the broken guitar. She wasn't smiling, not exactly, but the corner of her mouth lifted with a calm that didn't belong to a child. It was the kind of expression that suggested she was already 3 steps ahead of him, and that if he knew what she knew, he might choose his words more carefully. She tilted her head, studying him the way Magnolia once taught her to study a difficult passage of music, with precision, patience, and a quiet hunger for understanding. "Mr. Pierce," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" Logan raised an eyebrow, annoyed but curious. "What is it, kid? Make it quick." "Do you have children?" The question stopped him cold. It wasn't what she asked. Children were common enough, but the way she asked it, steady, serene, as if she wasn't a barefoot street girl standing in front of a television producer, but someone assessing him for reasons he couldn't grasp. He cleared his throat. "I do. 2 girls. Why?" Ari nodded once, the tiniest flicker of something almost sorrowful passing through her eyes. "Just wondering how you would feel," she said, "if someone invited them somewhere, just to be laughed at." Before Logan could respond, before he could even decide whether he felt insulted, threatened, or simply exposed, Ari turned away, her steps soft but deliberate, leaving him standing in the fluorescent hallway with a chill crawling up his spine. For the first time that day, Logan Pierce felt the faintest warning that he might have misunderstood the kind of child he was dealing with. Backstage at the New York Broadcasting Arena was colder than any alley Ari had ever slept in. Not because of the air conditioning humming overhead, but because every room, every corridor, every polished surface seemed designed to remind her she did not belong here. Assistants in black uniforms darted back and forth, carrying trays of gourmet snacks, bottled spring water, and makeup kits worth more than everything Ari had owned in her entire life. When Ari approached the long catering table, drawn by the warm smell of real food, a woman with a headset gently blocked her path. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were firm in the way people's eyes become when they believe they're protecting order from chaos. "Sorry, sweetheart, this is for the official contestants." She didn't wait for Ari to respond. She just guided her backward, as if nudging an abandoned dog away from a restaurant entrance. Ari stepped aside without complaint, gripping her broken guitar. Her stomach twisted, but the ache wasn't just hunger, it was recognition. She'd seen that look 1,000 times, a blend of pity and superiority, the kind that told her she could breathe the same air, stand in the same space, but she would never be considered equal. A burst of laughter sliced through the hallway. A group of well-dressed children clustered near the makeup chairs, each surrounded by stylists spraying mist, touching up eyeliner, curling hair. They were the prodigies, the favorites, the future faces of American stars. And leading them was Charlotte Hale, 13 years old, tall, blonde, wrapped in a velvet performance robe embroidered with her initials. She stared at Ari the way one might stare at a stain on an expensive rug. "Dad?" Charlotte asked loudly, tugging on the sleeve of the man beside her. "Why is that girl here?" Her father leaned down, lowering his voice, but not enough. "So you can shine even brighter. Contrast, darling. Every star needs darkness behind it." Charlotte's laughter rang through the hallway, a sound sharp enough to cut skin. The other children followed, emboldened by her confidence. Meanwhile, Ari lowered her gaze, not out of shame but focus. She was remembering something Magnolia once whispered to her on a freezing night in the subway, station where they'd performed for strangers rushing home. "Music is the weapon of the overlooked, child. When the world pretends not to see you, your voice is the one thing they cannot ignore. Train it, sharpen it. One day you'll need it." Magnolia had said those words with a seriousness that only made sense now. Logan Pierce reappeared just as Ari finished tuning one of her loose strings. His tone was dripping with mock concern. "Tell me, Ari, do you actually know any songs? It would be a shame to waste screen time." The other kids laughed again. Charlotte smirked over her bottle of mineral water. Ari lifted her head slowly. "I know a few," she said, her voice calm, even gentle. Logan scoffed. "What kind of a few? Street songs? Something you picked up begging for change?" Ari's fingers pressed lightly on the neck of the guitar, testing a chord. "Songs from the street," she said, "and songs from other places, too." Logan crossed his arms. "Do you even understand music theory? Tempo, key signatures, harmony?" Ari studied him for a moment, and then, in that small, unassuming voice that carried more steel than anyone expected, she asked, "Do you play any instruments, Mr. Pierce?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I don't need to play to recognize talent." "I understand." Ari nodded, though there was a glint in her eye. Quiet, razor sharp. That was the thing about her. She never raised her voice, never pushed back with anger. She replied with a calm so precise it felt like a blade. If Logan had listened closely, he might have heard the echo beneath her words. Nights spent singing in subway tunnels where her voice had to compete with the roar of trains. Mornings in wind-beaten alleyways where she practiced breath control because the cold left no room for error. Afternoons in abandoned parking structures where acoustics turned her small voice into something cathedral-sized. Ari Monroe had never taken a formal music class in her life, yet every unforgiving corner of New York had shaped her into something no conservatory could manufacture. But Logan didn't see any of that. Not yet. Ari waited until the hallway emptied, until the laughter of the privileged kids faded into the distance, and the hum of backstage machinery settled into a low, mechanical heartbeat. Only then did she kneel beside her worn backpack, the same one she had carried through shelters, subway tunnels, and long winter nights. Its zipper snagged as always, its fabric frayed from years of friction against concrete. But inside, untouched by the world's cruelty, lay a single yellowed envelope. She lifted it with both hands, as if it were something sacred. On the front, written in Magnolia Monroe's looping handwriting, were the words, "Open only when you are ready to rise." Ari traced the letters with her thumb, remembering her grandmother's voice, soft but commanding, a voice that carried the weight of jazz clubs in Harlem, gospel, choirs in Newark, and decades of music that refused to bow to oppression. Magnolia had always spoken as if she knew the world would one day test Ari in ways no child should have to endure. And now, in this cold backstage corridor where no warmth belonged, the envelope seemed to glow faintly against Ari's skin, as if waiting. She opened it. Inside was a letter Magnolia had written during her final weeks, when she sensed time slipping through her fingers. The paper was brittle, but the message was anything but fragile. Magnolia revealed a history Ari had never fully understood. She had been the closest mentor, friend, and artistic compass of Jonas Mitchell, the man who now sat at the very top of the national broadcasting empire. A man whose decisions shaped what America saw, heard, and believed. A man Magnolia once described as the son she never had. Ari had known of Jonas. She had not known Magnolia meant this Jonas. Before she could absorb the truth, the air shifted. Footsteps approached, not hurried, not careless, but steady and deliberate. When Ari looked up, the harsh fluorescent lights above her flickered, replaced by a softer glow spilling from the doorway at the end of the hall. A tall figure stepped into view, his presence warm in a place that had felt frozen since she arrived. Jonas Mitchell. Gray at the temples now, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, but unmistakably the man Magnolia had spoken of. He stopped mid-step when he saw the name on the envelope in Ari's hand, his breath caught, as if the world had just knocked the wind out of him. What did you say your full name was?" he asked gently. Ari rose to her feet, meeting his gaze without fear. "Ariana Monroe, Magnolia's granddaughter." Jonas didn't move at first. His eyes shimmered, not with surprise but with something deeper, grief, guilt, and a kind of awe. "She never told me," he whispered. "Magnolia, she never said she had a grandchild." Ari swallowed hard. "I didn't know you existed either, not until now." He stepped closer, lowering himself to her height, as if she were someone whose presence required reverence. "Where have you been all this time?" Ari answered simply. "On the streets, since she passed." Jonas shut his eyes, and the weight of that truth pressed visibly onto his shoulders. Magnolia had mentored him through his darkest years, had shaped his artistry, his leadership, his sense of purpose. And while he rose to power, her granddaughter had been sleeping under awnings and singing for coins. He placed a hand over his heart. "Ari, I am so sorry. I didn't know. If I had—" She stopped him with a small gesture, a quiet raise of her hand. "Mr. Mitchell," she said softly, "I don't want your protection." Jonas blinked, unsure if he heard her correctly. "I want you to let them do what they're planning to do," Ari continued. "Let them laugh, let them sabotage, let them show the world who they really are." Her voice was steady, unshakable. Jonas stared at her, as if witnessing a prophecy unfold. "Why?" Ari lifted her broken guitar, her fingers resting where Magnolia had once placed them. "Because when they try to humiliate me," she said, "I want it all recorded. Every word, every look, every act." Slowly Jonas nodded, not because he fully understood, but because he could feel the force of Magnolia moving through this child. Ari wasn't just her granddaughter. She was her legacy, sharpened to a point the world wasn't ready for. "I'll have my team film everything," he said quietly. Ari exhaled, her breath calm as dawn. "Good," she whispered. "Then let the show begin." And in that moment, standing beneath the warm spill of light that shouldn't have existed in such a cold backstage world, Jonas Mitchell realized the truth Magnolia had once tried to tell him. Some voices are born not just to sing, but to rewrite the way the world listens. Ari stepped into the mouth of the American Stars Arena as if crossing a threshold between two worlds. One moment she was backstage, swallowed by cold corridors and fluorescent lights. The next, she was standing beneath a dome of blazing white beams that sliced through the darkness like judgment itself. The roar of 500 people pulsed around her, rising and falling in uneven waves as they took in the sight before them. A barefoot girl, clothes worn thin, carrying a guitar that looked as if it had survived a war. Whispers rolled through the audience. Is she lost? Is this part of the show? Where did they find her? Some laughed softly, nudging the person beside them. Others lifted their phones, already sensing this might be viral material, the kind strangers share online for a quick joke. Ari felt the weight of their eyes on her, sharp as gravel under bare feet, but she walked to center stage with a poise that didn't belong to a child, her shadow stretching long beneath the lights. Behind the curtain, Logan Pierce watched her with a smirk. This was the moment he'd planned for all afternoon. He tapped his headset once, a simple gesture, but the meaning was unmistakable. Do it, now, and the sound system obeyed. A high-pitched squeal tore through the arena, so sudden and violent it made people wince. The speakers hissed with static, then cracked open with a roar like metal grinding against metal. The massive screen behind Ari flickered, fragmenting into glitching shards of color. The audience jerked back, startled. A few covered their ears. Then, slowly, laughter began bubbling up. Of course, the street girl can't even handle her own equipment. What did they expect? This is embarrassing. People pulled out their phones faster now. This was content. This was entertainment. Ari didn't move at first. The noise enveloped her, shaking the stage under her feet. She lifted the microphone, tapped it once, twice, but the distortion swallowed everything whole. Logan leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the moment she would crumble. But she didn't. Instead, she lowered the microphone, gently, deliberately, letting it hang useless at her side. With her other hand, she reached up and brushed a thumb across the neck of her broken guitar, as tenderly as if she were waking an old friend. Then she took a single step forward, planted her feet, closed her eyes, and exhaled. When she began to sing, there was no amplification, no reverb, no technical support whatsoever, just a human voice rising raw from the center of the stage. But it was enough to silence the room. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice didn't need a microphone. It had been forged in subway tunnels where she had to outsing the thunder of trains. It had been shaped in wind-bitten alleyways where each breath felt like frost carving into her lungs. It had been sharpened in underground passages where Magnolia stood behind her, tapping rhythm onto her spine, pushing her to hold a note longer, purer, stronger. Now, that voice filled the entire arena. The static still shrieked from the speakers, but Ari's sound cut through it like a blade through cloth. Clean, steady, impossibly controlled. People in the front row lowered their phones without realizing it. Those who had been laughing grew still, their smiles fading into open-mouthed awe. Her voice climbed, soared, bent light inside the room, and every tremor of emotion poured straight from the years she'd spent unseen. A woman in the fifth row began to cry. A man near the aisle stood up without meaning to. Children backstage peered out from behind the curtain, eyes wide, the humiliation they'd anticipated dissolving into disbelief. And while Logan frantically gestured to his crew, cut the feed now," Jonas Mitchell, standing at the far end of the arena with his own team, lifted a hand. "Keep rolling. Stream it. All of it." The camera operators obeyed. Red lights blinked on. The nation began watching. Ari held her final note with a clarity that didn't shake, didn't waver, didn't shrink even as the sabotaged sound system spat static around her. And then, silence. Not the kind forced by malfunction, but the kind that arrives when a room collectively forgets to breathe. Ari opened her eyes. In that small, suspended moment, before the applause could break open, before the world rearranged itself around what they had just witnessed, the air felt electric, trembling with the realization that something extraordinary had happened on a stage meant to humiliate her. If this moment sends a shiver down your spine, if you felt even for a second the power of a voice refusing to be silenced, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Stories like this deserve to live, and your support keeps them alive. Then, as if the whole arena woke from the same dream at the same time, the applause erupted, deafening, unstoppable, a tidal wave crashing to shore. Ari stood in the center of it all, her small frame steady, her broken guitar pressed to her chest, and for the first time that night, the spotlight didn't judge her. It bowed. The applause was still thundering through the American Stars arena when a second figure stepped into the light. At first, the audience thought it was another judge, another producer, another cog in the machine that had just been publicly humbled by a barefoot child. But the moment Jonas Mitchell appeared on stage, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the room inhaled sharply and forgot how to exhale. Jonas wasn't just a man in a suit. He carried the authority of someone whose decisions could tilt industries, whose voice could reroute the course of a national broadcast. And tonight, he stepped forward with a solemn purpose etched across his face. Ari stood still at center stage, the broken guitar against her chest, as Jonas approached her. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice amplified and resonant, "what you witnessed just now was not an accident. It was not staged. And it was certainly not the performance some people expected from Ari Monroe." A ripple spread through the crowd. Phones lifted. Cameras zoomed. Even the children backstage froze with their mouths half open. "Ariana," Jonas continued, "is the granddaughter of Magnolia Monroe." Gasps erupted like fireworks. Even those who didn't know the name felt its power, but those who did, musicians, vocal coaches, industry veterans, looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. Magnolia Monroe, the jazz gospel titan, the woman whose voice was said to make angels ashamed of their silence, the pioneer who shattered barriers in an era determined to keep doors locked, and the mentor who had shaped Jonas Mitchell when he was still a young, uncertain man, clawing his way into the industry. "Magnolia was my teacher," Jonas said, his voice trembling just enough to reveal the depth of the truth. "My guide, my family, and she trained this child with a discipline and brilliance I have never seen replicated." Ari lowered her eyes, a quiet storm contained behind her lashes. "And yet," Jonas continued, his tone darkening, "when Magnolia's granddaughter walked into this building, hungry, alone, overlooked, this production team chose to humiliate her." At his signal, the massive screen behind them lit up. The audience turned, expecting promotional footage. Instead, raw, unfiltered reality filled the screen. Clips of Logan mocking Ari, assistants laughing as they denied her food, Charlotte's father explaining she was only here to make his daughter shine brighter, Logan instructing the crew to sabotage the sound system, Charlotte and the privileged children giggling behind their hands. The footage wasn't edited, it wasn't softened, it was damning. The arena erupted, shouts of disbelief, booing, outrage. Some audience members stood up, pointing toward the backstage area as if demanding justice right then and there. And then, the cameras found him. Logan Pierce trying to slip behind a curtain, his face pale as chalk. The audience roared when he appeared on screen, and Jonas turned toward him like a judge calling a verdict. "Logan Pierce," he said, his voice slicing through the arena, "you are dismissed from this show, effective immediately." Logan froze. For a split second, he looked like a man trying to decide whether to beg or run. Jonas didn't give him the chance. "And not just this show," he continued. "You are terminated from the entire network, permanently, and every word you said, every cruel action you orchestrated, was broadcast live to millions." The crowd exploded. Some cheered, some booed Logan with venom, others simply stared, stunned by how swiftly power had shifted in the room. Logan attempted to protest, but the boos swallowed his voice. When security approached, he stumbled backward, visibly trembling. The once confident producer, the man who had laughed at a hungry child, now looked like a man watching the ceiling collapse over his life. Meanwhile, backstage, the privileged children stood in a tight cluster. Charlotte Hale, the golden girl who had mocked Ari first and loudest, covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because she was punished. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, she understood what cruelty looked like when reflected back at her. One by one, the children lowered their eyes, unable to meet Ari's gaze. The balance of power in the arena had shifted, and everyone felt it. Everyone saw who stood taller. A barefoot girl with a broken guitar. In the days that followed, the country felt as if it were vibrating at a higher frequency, humming with the aftershock of what had happened on the American Stars stage. The clip of Ari singing through Sabotage didn't just circulate online, it detonated across social media. In less than 24 hours, it amassed over 60 million views. People replayed the moment her voice broke through the static, as if it were a piece of living evidence that grace could bloom in the ugliest soil. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. News anchors analyzed every frame, and celebrities reposted her video with captions like, "This is what real talent looks like." For once, the nation wasn't arguing about whether a child like Ari belonged on a stage. They were arguing about why she had ever been doubted at all. Jonas Mitchell moved quickly. Within 48 hours, he stood at a press conference beneath the network's insignia, his expression solemn but unwavering. Cameras crowded the room, reporters filled the aisles. But Jonas spoke directly and without hesitation. "We failed a child," he said. "We failed her grandmother's legacy. And we failed the values this network claims to uphold. It will not happen again." Then he announced sweeping reforms, new oversight committees, psychological protections for child contestants, and mandatory ethical training for every producer on staff. But the moment that seized the nation's attention came next. In honor of Magnolia Monroe, Jonas unveiled a new program, the Magnolia Monroe Fellowship, full music scholarships for children from underserved communities, designed to find the voices that America too often overlooks. It was more than a scholarship. It was a rebuke of every door that had ever been slammed in Ari's face. And Ari herself became the fellowship's very first recipient. She didn't return to the streets after the show. She didn't wander subway tunnels or sleep beneath awnings anymore. Jonas and his wife completed the legal process to adopt her, welcoming her into a home filled with warmth, books, and a piano that hadn't been touched in years, not since Magnolia last visited it. Ari enrolled at the New York Academy of Music, where professors who normally trained prodigies flown in from across the world now found themselves whispering in awe at the girl with the calm eyes and the storm-forged voice. Her broken guitar, once a symbol of survival, was restored by a master luthier who polished every crack, reinforced every seam. But by Ari's request, he left the scars visible. She said they were part of the sound, and then came the night that sealed her place in America's heart, her performance at Carnegie Hall. The hall's golden lights shimmered over the audience as Ari stepped out in a simple navy dress, the restored guitar hanging from her shoulder. People who had never cried at a performance wiped their eyes before she even began. When she strummed her first chord, the hall seemed to inhale. When she lifted her voice, it felt as though the entire country leaned in to listen. By the time she finished, the crowd rose in a unified wave of applause so fierce, so unrestrained, that musicians backstage swore they felt the floor tremble. Somewhere in that audience sat Charlotte Hale with her parents, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Days later, she sent Ari a handwritten letter, messy, tear-stained, sincere. She apologized not just for mocking her, but for never seeing her as a person in the first place. Ari wrote back, and what followed was not a miracle but something quieter, gentler, the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Because even broken things, once repaired, can shine in ways no one predicts. And Ari Monroe, like her restored guitar, was proof of exactly that. 2 years later, America no longer spoke of Ari Monroe as the barefoot girl with a broken guitar. They spoke of her as something else entirely, a rising legend, a force stitched from gospel fire and the steel of the streets. Her first album, recorded at 12 years old, stunned the industry. Critics wrote that her voice carried both the ache of survival and the clarity of destiny. When Grammy nominations were announced, Ari's name appeared on the list, proof that the world finally recognized what Magnolia Monroe had seen in her from the beginning. On the night of the ceremony, Ari stepped onto the stage with the same guitar she had carried through the cold nights of New York. Not replaced, not hidden, restored, but not erased. The scars along its body shimmered under the lights like constellations, evidence of every hardship that forged her. She held it the way one holds a promise kept. When she spoke, her voice was calm, intimate, textured with the kind of wisdom that makes a room lean forward. Real talent, she said, doesn't choose where it's born. It only asks you to carry it boldly, even when the world says you don't belong. The audience fell silent, not out of politeness, but reverence, because every person there knew she wasn't reciting a line. She was speaking a truth she had bled for. After the ceremony, Ari didn't disappear into fame the way prodigies often do. Instead, she traveled. She went to forgotten schoolyards, crowded shelters, small-town community centers. She listened to children who hummed melodies into their sleeves because no one had ever bothered to ask if they knew how to sing. She offered scholarships through the Ari Monroe Fellowship, placing instruments into hands that had never held anything delicate before. She found talent everywhere, voices trembling with fear, or bursting with fire, or quiet as breathing. Children who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Children who reminded her of herself. And in each one, she planted the same belief Magnolia had planted in her. Your voice is not a burden. It is a bridge. Sometimes, after a long day of traveling, Ari would find herself alone in a large auditorium, one of the places where she'd performed, now emptied and still. She would walk into the center of the stage, the way she once did as a terrified little girl forced into humiliation. She would breathe in the silence, feeling the echo of her grandmother's presence curling around her like warm smoke. Then she would close her eyes, lift her guitar, and let a single note ring out, clear, unwavering, infinite. In that sound lived Magnolia's old whisper, "Rise, child, rise until they can no longer pretend not to hear you." In the end, the story of Ari Monroe reminds us of something America forgets far too easily. Brilliance does not always arrive polished. Sometimes it comes wrapped in dust, hunger, and a broken guitar that the world mistakes for weakness. Ari proved that talent is not measured by where you sleep at night or what you wear on stage, but by the fire you carry when no one is watching. And if Ari stands today as a symbol of rising above, then Logan Pierce remains the shadow behind her light, a reminder of what happens when power is used to crush instead of lift. His downfall is not the heart of this story, but a necessary truth. When you mock the unheard, when you try to silence a child because she doesn't fit your image of greatness, you reveal more about yourself than about her. Ari, now 13, still walks through the neighborhoods most people avoid. She brings her guitar, the same one rebuilt from its scars, and she sings for children who don't yet know the worth of their own voices. She kneels beside them, listens to them, tells them the same thing Magnolia once told her. Your voice is a door, not a wall. And on quiet nights, when she finishes another song in another forgotten corner of the country, her melody drifts upward, soft but steady, carrying the promise that no child will ever be dismissed the way she once was. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of the power hidden inside people the world tries to overlook, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Your support helps bring more forgotten voices into the light, voices that, like Ari's, deserve to be heard.